So I'd like to introduce Matt Drewitz. He's a research scientist at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. He's worked for the state of Minnesota for over 25 years in water quality policy, planning, and research. And recently he was a member of the team of agency and university staff that helped revise and update Minnesota's nutrient reduction strategy. Was just posted. So welcome.
Yep. Well, thanks, Bruce. Yeah, again, I'm Matt Drewitz, a research scientist. And when I started I've been with MPCA for the last 3 years and was at Bowser for a number of years. But I started my career at Department of Ag and I was just across the hall from Bruce. So I spent a lot of time in his office trying to listen and learn. And I appreciate your patience with me when I was a young staff person. So, all right, thanks. So I'm going to go talk about the Minnesota nutrient reduction strategy. So this is going to be quite different from what you've seen a lot of the plot scale and research type of work. And we're going to talk about very large scales at the basin and even the national level. So as Bruce mentioned, we just, our updated nutrient reduction strategy was finalized and was just published last Thursday. And so we started rolling that out and it's available. You go to our website. So all the information will be there and I'll talk about some of the documents that you can find there. And it's a very large and lengthy document. So, topics today, I'm going to talk about just kind of an introduction of what the nutrient strategy is. And many of you have seen a lot of our presentations and heard about that in the past. And also just talk about progress we've made to date, kind of some of the remaining nutrient reduction needs, what we need to meet our final goals, and then kind of a summary of our public comments that we got in the public comment period. And then I'll talk about some next steps and get some questions too. So just in a very high level, we know that nutrients, can be an issue to our waters, both, here locally and downstream. And so then when we have, excessive nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus, we can get algal growth, low oxygen levels, can impact human health and also impact aquatic life. And so the nutrient reduction strategy, it's really a combination of both its in-state goals for loads of nitrogen and phosphorus going downstream. So again, we're looking at these state level goals at downstream loads of nitrogen and phosphorus. And so we've got sources, both point sources from the urban side of things, wastewater treatment plants, for example, and non-point sources, talking about agriculture. And really want to make sure that we're improving both the water quality in our ecosystems here in Minnesota as well as downstream to both the Gulf, Lake Winnipeg, and Lake Superior. And so then this nutrient reduction strategy was really, looking at what amounts of nutrients we have, entering our water bodies here and downstream. And again, these nutrients come from many sources, as I mentioned, agriculture, wastewater treatment, stormwater, nitrate leaching into groundwater, stream bank erosion, and so we have all these different sources, and those are all captured within this strategy. And so where we see our excess nutrients, again, really the focus of our strategy is looking at downstream, looking at the Gulf, and we're looking at helping with other states mitigate the issues to the Gulf and the dead zone down there that we see in the summertime, where we have low dissolved oxygen levels that impact fisheries and in the shrimping industry. And also we're looking at towards the north as we go towards Lake Winnipeg, which is impacted by the Red River of the North, and also water coming from Lake of the Woods that goes to the Winnipeg River that way as well, and then into Lake Superior. And then we also talk about in our strategy in Minnesota, what's kind of going on at our local level and those within our state and those impacts in Minnesota waters. So the nutrient reduction strategy is nothing new. It's been around for a while. It's been, our original strategy was developed in 2014. And my coworker who just recently retired, Dave Wall, with MPCA, he was he was a lead scientist on our current, our 2025 updated strategy, and also he worked with that as well. And so that original strategy kind of came out of a number of states working with EPA and USDA and other federal agencies and tribal governments looking at impacts to the Gulf. from the Mississippi. And so they all signed an agreement, and there was an agreement in place every state would develop a nutrient strategy. And Minnesota is kind of unique because we have water going in various directions. So we also included in what we do for the Red River and Lake Superior basins as well. So our original strategy was developed in 2014, about the same time many other states were doing that as well. And then we developed the progress report in 2020, kind of giving some of the updates of programs that have been put in place and some of the water quality changes. And really for our 2025 updated and revised strategy, we're just kind of bringing in new information and modernizing that application. So so I don't know what I did there. There we go. This one here. There we go. Yep. And so with that, our strategy now, I'll talk a little bit in the next slide here, just kind of things that we updated, but we had a lot of partners working and helped us put information together. And so I don't know if you can, I think there's a lot of people in this room that were part of the work. We had our federal agency folks with NRCS and USGS, and we saw Met Council, the University of Minnesota, then all the state agencies here on the right were also part of this. So if you can raise your hand if you were part of the nutrient strategy work, or you helped revise something or provide comments. So we got some people in our room here, and I think we had a total over 100 people who were involved with this. So some of the main things that were updated, we had in last decade, we've got a lot of new monitoring data, both water quality flow information, nutrient loading data. So we incorporated that information to help us with our trend analysis. We had a lot of advances in our our water management framework for the state. So of how we do monitoring, assessment, develop TMDL projects, watershed restoration protection strategies, and watershed management plans. And so we've got a lot of coverage of those in most of our major watersheds now with strategies and plans. And so that was not the case a decade ago. So we wanted to talk about that. A lot of innovations in urban wastewater and stormwater science. We did a new agricultural practice science assessment. And I'll talk about that in a second. And then we have a lot of new programs, both at the federal and state level, and funding that have been put in place, and especially with the Clean Water Fund here in the state of Minnesota and how it's helped a lot of this work. And then we have a lot of new metrics, some new metrics we're tracking, and there's a lot of new technology that we can visualize things and use dashboards to look at progress and see what we're doing. So these are the different components, different chapters that we had part of the nutrient strategy. And basically the main ones are we had our chapter 2, we're looking at what are the loads, what's the state of things going outside of Minnesota, and then chapter 3, what's happening within Minnesota. And then we talked about what's going on in the urban landscape, wastewater, stormwater. Chapter 5 for people in this room, that's really the critical one, is kind of the rural land and water chapter, which we got a lot of assistance from Department of Agriculture and putting that one together. Then chapter 6 was looking at our watershed framework, what's been happening. And then chapter 7 is tracking and how we're going to show progress. Then we have kind of a summary in chapter 8 at the end. So one of the things is we have many supporting documents. And so our strategy is about 300 pages long, but there's another 1,200 pages of about 20 different supporting documents that were put together, and we work with our state agency partners and University of Minnesota on a lot of these. And so the kind of the more critical ones for this group here are really the really the science assessment on nitrogen phosphorus. And then also we worked with USDA ARS on a nutrient balance project, which is our one document that's actually draft. Everything else is finalized. We're still working through that project as it got transferred to the University of Minnesota. So we'll be doing some additional updates to that specific supporting document over the next year. And so here is the list of those documents. And one of the comments that we got in the comment period is that we had put them all in one large PDF, which was very large to see. And so we've broken all those documents down into individual reports so you can better access them and review them.
So one of the things that was really important for this work was to do a more rigorous science assessment both for nitrogen and phosphorus. And Carl is here, and he was really a big part of that work. And so we worked with Dr. Laura Christensen and Dr. Rosen on developing kind of this part one of this report was looking at nitrogen practices and getting a better sense of where we're at with various types of practices, whether it's nutrient management or more like continuous living cover type practices, drainage water management, or other types of land conversion practices. And so we can get a kind of sense of what the range is for nutrient reduction from those practices. And it's really important that we think about some of these practices like nutrient management may have a little lower reduction efficiency, but we see those in a greater area of the landscape, and those it's probably the most important practice that we need to get out there to make a big difference. But we have other practices like drainage water management, which Laura was a expert in that area. We're getting more information. We can see good reductions, but we don't have as many of those practices on the landscape. So, but I think one thing is with this work is we reviewed over 700 papers, and we had to whittle down to, we really tried to focus on papers that were similar to Minnesota's climate, and also looked at, looking at like all the research we've seen so far today, kind of that level of rigor of research in the field. And there's also a phosphorus component, which Dr. Rosen worked with Emerson Souza as well, and looked at those types of practices and those efficiencies. And one of the things we'll do with both the nitrogen and phosphorus sides, we'll take this data, it helps informs our modeling efforts, it helps informs just other activities we're doing as well. And it just helps us build this kind of scientific foundation that we can build upon in the future. And so, because in our original strategy, we kind of depended on a lot of research kind of at Iowa State and some of their work that they did for their nutrient strategy. So we wanted to make sure we had some more kind of Minnesota specific work included. So I want to talk a little bit about progress, to date. And this is a slide that my coworker Dave Law put together, and just kind of talks about the different scales of work where we have all this information that we have at the state level, how we're supporting various groups, whether it's science or the funding or the programs or our tools and how we're going to track things, kind of both at the government level, private sector, and the NGO side of things. And that really everything for meeting our goals, whether in-state goals or downstream, we really need to work together at the local level between local watershed professionals and also with farmers, and getting practices on the ground that actually improve our waters. And if we improve, our local waters for nutrients, then we'll see impacts downstream will come as well. So that all kind of ties together. And so with that, we've seen a lot of increases in the amount of practices that we've seen that have gone on the ground. On the agricultural side, we've seen about 4 million acres of government practices that have had some sort of treatment over the last decade or so. And also on the wastewater side and the point source side of things, we've seen about a 76% reduction in phosphorus, actually since kind of the baseline period that we look at, which is from the 1980 to 1996. So we've seen a lot of things that have gone on the ground, a lot of investment as well. With the nutrient reduction strategy, we're looking really for loads leaving the state, but we also look in our strategy, we talk about what we're seeing for different levels of concentrations, phosphorus and nitrogen. And we've seen some reductions on the phosphorus side and some reductions and some kind of maybe more of a mixed bag on reductions and increases on nitrogen. But we've got a really good system of data that we're collecting, so we can keep this information together. We can do long-term trend analysis with as well, and we can look at different time periods. We get different results as well. So more recently, things are kind of more flat on the nitrogen side and reduces on phosphorus. And so we have seen for the Mississippi River Basin, we still have a reduction need about we still have reduction needs for phosphorus, but of about going down to the Gulf, and we've seen pretty good reductions because of all the work that's gone on the wastewater side of things and on the agricultural side of things as well. So that's been some good progress and meeting towards our goals. And one of the things too we've seen at the Gulf, we have seen some reductions of the size of the hypoxic zone. And so the hypoxic zone, it'll never go away. And so we're looking for is just trying to mitigate it and get it to a size that's reasonable and can help mitigate any impacts to the industries down there, with fish and shrimp. And so we're looking to get the hypoxic zone down to about something less than 2,000 square miles. And so on dry years, kind of drought conditions nationwide, we'll see it getting actually pretty close. But on other wet years, it's much higher. And so right now we're usually it's in that 4,000 to 5,000 square mile range when we see that. But we have seen a trajectory going downwards on the size of the hypoxic zone. So that's been a positive that we've seen in recent years. And also on the nitrate side of things at the Gulf, there's been about 20% reduction. So we see a little bit different numbers on nitrogen and phosphorus from our state line versus what we see at the Gulf. And one of the things Warren talked about, the lag time paper that MDA has worked on, through all this work, our partners at USDA and USGS and NOAA and EPA, they've been looking at lag time issues for both nitrogen and phosphorus, both at the Gulf, within fields, and then local levels too. So those are the things that we're trying to get a handle on. Okay. And then we've had a lot of other things that have, happened in the last decade. So we've got a lot of new programs that have been going out there. We've got, getting support from the Clean Water Fund. We've had things, Courtney works here with NRCS and a lot of new programs with RCPP and those types of practices that have helped support this work. Again, we've got all of our watershed restoration protection strategies have been covered throughout the state. Again, the wastewater and the other BMPs, have been increased, like I mentioned before, and we are seeing in-state water quality improvements both in groundwater, our rivers and lakes. And then we've had in the Mississippi River seen about 32% reduction on phosphorus, which has been great. So the kind of main nutrient reduction needs, and so we looking at both Mississippi River Basin and the River Basin. So for Lake Superior, we're just kind of looking at keeping things the same, kind of because we've got good water quality there and trying to keep that thing stable, which they mostly have been. And so on the nitrogen side, we've had the goals for the Gulf on the Mississippi have been 45% reduction for both phosphorus and nitrogen. And then for nitrogen, and we looked at about a 50% reduction for nitrogen and phosphorus in the River Valley. So we've seen reductions, slight reductions in nitrogen in both basins. A good reduction on phosphorus. Again, in the Mississippi River Basin, the River Basin may have a slight uptick on phosphorus. But one thing to mention is that the loads we have coming from the Mississippi River Basin are much larger than we see in the Red River Basin, and I'll have a map that shows that as well. So the percentages don't kind of match up to what loads we would see being reduced. Again, this is just kind of looking out our goals towards 2040 is kind of the time frame we've set for the Mississippi River Basin and for the Red River Basin. And actually at the national level, EPA has kind of set 2035 as a goal, but we had set our goal before they kind of put an end date goal on there for nitrogen and phosphorus. But it'll take kind of cooperation both from ag urban areas to look at meeting these goals long term. One of the things that we also included were some of the kind of in-state priority areas. And one of the things we're kind of we didn't really have as much in our original strategy, and so that people could use for other watershed planning efforts. And so we kind of looked at where we have higher nitrate concentrations, both for streams and for groundwater issues, and also on phosphorus, where we're looking to do lake restoration and protection, or we have river eutrophication as well. So we kind of included that information collectively within our strategy, even though it doesn't necessarily map right exactly for the loads going downstream, which I'll show in a little bit, but we want to have those kind of priority maps as well. And we've gotten some good feedback from our partners at USDA and EPA of having kind of the priority maps that we have in there that kind of shows where we're looking at focusing, especially when they're looking at federal initiatives for projects. And so kind of for me, the final goals is we were kind of one of the things that we have to do is, and many of you have seen this slide if you've gone any of our trains over the last year, this is looking at the Mississippi River Basin and kind of our total load reduction needs of 78 million pounds per year. And we kind of did a scenario of different types of practices that we could do and how many acres it would take to get there. And so we're kind of required for our nutrient strategy to talk about what level of effort, no matter how high it is, like what would it take. And then there would be a significant amount of effort that would be needed for various types of practices to meet our goals. And so some of the things, like we have some practices like tile water management, which that would be a really big increase because we don't have a lot of those BMPs in place. But like for fertilizer and manure management, we have a lot of that going on already, and so that's why we're kind of looking at a lower number that we need to increase, because we have a lot of that work happening already. And so also with that, we're looking at like what would the costs be, and we have some kind of generalized costs within the nutrient strategy. And there's for the Mississippi River Basin here, it would be quite a large number of many hundreds of millions of dollars to actually implement these types of practices if you're using government programs. And we know that we're spending a few $100 million already per year based on federal and state support, and also what farmers are kicking in and local governments as well. But that's something that, and the private sector too, is inputting. And so one of the things we want to do is kind of think about long-term on the economic side of things, working with the University of Minnesota. And we just kind of checked in with the Applied Economics Department last week to kind of think about how do we look at these costs and economic impacts more as we go down the road. And so one of the things we've also developed, we've put together a series of maps of kind of where we're looking at. These are for nitrogen and phosphorus, kind of the watersheds and kind of what their load contribution to the state line would be to meet the 45% reduction goal. And so with this type of these priority maps, we're actually looking at how we could publish some of this data and make it more accessible to people and users for sure. And we've been developing other tools as well that are out there, that are online, that we can both look at what are the impacts from, if you want to do scenarios, both at a small watershed area or a basin level, then also looking at whether the practices that have gone in with government programs, what are their impacts, have been. So we've got the BMP effects estimator tools, which have been on our nutrient reduction strategy website. And these are kind of new ways to easily access this type of information and run scenarios for both, citizens or local governments or other organizations. And along with this, we've got a number of other tools where we can track BMP progress and water quality data as well. So with that, I want to talk a little bit just about public comments. And we've had the nutrient reduction strategy, the draft was out from July 15th to September 10th, and we actually extended the period because we had some requests for more time to review. We got 62 individual letters, about half of those from private individuals and half of those from organizations and different groups and academic groups. So we had 446 individual comments. And so then with that, we kind of developed a response to comment document, which we've also posted on our website. And so we went through each of those individual comments and tried to provide, a response. We did make some, based on the comments, we did make some minor adjustments, especially the language and being more, and especially clarifying language for various chapters. Also kind of give us some homework too for the future as well. So I think the public comments are really helpful for us as we move forward. And some of the kind of common topics that we saw coming from the comments were people are looking at, there was a lot of comments on regulations, both for some people wanting more and some people wanting stay the same or less. So it's kind of across the whole spectrum there. Also, we had a lot of support for farmers, landowners, local conservation folks, agronomists, that type of thing, and also providing incentives for people to do work and ways for people to network. So that was something actually we see probably one of the higher amount of comments that we saw back were on that. We did get a lot of comments too supporting continuous living cover. So that was a pretty high one, but also we had comments of being very careful and making sure that we cast a pretty wide net when we think about continuous living cover and not keep it as narrow. And so I think that's one thing we'll be working with the State Department of Agriculture on that, thinking about that. And I'll talk about that in the next slide. And then also just making sure to keep collecting data, monitoring, what's going on. And so we can have good trends and we can see progress, and feel confident in that as we keep going. So we've done a pretty good job of that, but want to make sure we're just kind of keeping going there. And then we had comments both for and against developing an aquatic life standard for nitrates in streams. And so kind of split down the road there as well. So those are kind of the main themes. And so we had a lot of comments that kind of just stuck to these main themes and we tried to address those. But then we had a lot of very, very specific comments and we would address those individually. So kind of wrap things up here. I just want to talk about kind of next steps that we have for the nutrient reduction strategy. Now that we've got out there, we're continuing doing some outreach, to people, just like today, and we'll be talking in St. Cloud here again here in a couple of weeks, and other venues doing things, online webinars, and also developing other videos and trying to get more information out to people. And talking to folks one-on-one, we've had some one-on-one conversation with various groups that wanted to talk about the nutrient strategy in more detail than like I'm presenting today. So if your group would like to do that, we're very happy to go and talk with folks in more detail. Also, we're looking at kind of developing easier ways to access the information. And this was a big effort to put together this nutrient strategy update. But in the future, we're hoping with technology and other ways that we're kind of incrementally, updating things and not doing like one big 10 years from now doing a whole overhaul. And so we'll kind of try to take a different approach from that. And then also we'll need to get feedback from you probably a little more frequently on what we're doing and how we're doing that. And so that's something we're looking at, at least trying to put together a dashboard over the next couple of years. And we're looking to get some feedback on that. We'll be also, coordinating as state agencies, federal agencies, and other partners, making sure we coordinate and keep working on this work. One of the things is there was brought up is having kind of a work group to look at continuous living cover. There's a lot of groups already looking at that, but we'll be working with Margaret Wagner and Reed Christensen at MDA. They'll be helping kind of lead an effort to kind of look at that. So that's one example of how we'll try to get stakeholders together and make sure we're not duplicating efforts because there's a lot of that work already happening. But that's something that we'll be looking at coordination here in the near term. And then we'll be trying to update our supporting data sets, our documents, our tools, making sure that, on an annual basis, we keep those things up, keep up with the data we have. And as things pivot with different programs, we can keep up to speed. And then we do have some one-time funds that helped actually support a lot of the work we did to develop this revision from EPA, from hypoxia grant funds. And so we have a little bit of money to do some more additional like research work, looking at how to scale up adoption of various practices, looking at some research gaps and helping develop some of our tools. And we don't know if we'll get additional funds in the future. Things are pretty tenuous there, but we have some funds that kind of do some work over the next couple of years. Okay. And so with that, that's kind of the end here. And I was gonna, again, if we have a newsletter you can sign up for and you can get updates and on the nutrient strategy. And just want to thank you for listening in here today and want to give thanks to all of you that helped participate in the process. And also my coworker, Corey Layfield, who is our clean water fund, she's our coordinator for the overall coordinator too, as well for nutrient strategy. So Thank you. And with that, I'll take some questions and just keep advancing. Okay.
Questions in-house? Lee?
How do you see there's people online. If you could tell us a little bit more on how you see this influencing future regulatory or legislative actions, that'd be helpful.
Okay, thanks, Lee. Yeah, the nutrient reduction strategy is in itself is not a regulatory document, so we can't promulgate rules or anything through it. Because we had that question came up a lot of how it relates to regulation, and so we've kind of talked about what we've done in the past and what's going on right now. There's a lot of things happening on the side, that they're kind of independent from this, but our work with our feedlot folks are here today. We'll be updating some of the feedlot rules and some of the permits we've updated. For like future regulations, we did indicate that there's a need for additional nitrogen reductions, and regulation that whether it's point source or non-point source, could be needed, but we don't have a specific like this shall happen because of that. But that may be for the politicians to discuss and everything like that. But so we don't have any, like for the Quad Life nitrate standard, we don't have a timeline for moving that forward, but that was something we mentioned, but we haven't put that in place yet. So thanks, Lee.
Other questions for Matt? Matt, you showed some loading by watershed for both nitrogen and phosphorus, and some of those watersheds are high in both. How is that information used in distributing clean water funds or cost sharing, or is it used for allocations?
Well, I think we've kind of relied on the local watershed groups to kind of take that information and build it into their plans. And one of the things we're looking at doing is helping May develop some guidance too of how to pull some of this data into plan updates or RAPS updates in the future. And so a lot of our plans are already kind of targeting nutrients, especially phosphorus, probably more than because a lot of plans, especially in southern Minnesota, have kind of focused on sediment, issues and phosphorus, and to some degree nitrogen. So there's probably a need to increase some of that. So,
you have another question back here?
My question is more pertains to like the public comments that you guys take. And for lack of a better way of saying it, I'll just say it. How do you filter out the crazies? Because, you think about the caucuses going on tonight, the people that show up are the most passionate and tend to have the most extreme views. And it seems to me that the people who comment on these things aren't always the average person. So how do you filter through that a little bit? Because you can think on it.
Well, I guess I've been working in this kind of arena for a long time, so I've got a lot of comments from all over the place. So I'm kind of used to it, and in a way, sometimes I appreciate people from different ends of the spectrum of their beliefs to kind of push me on things. So I'm not being complacent, but I think we did, even though we had some things that were probably on that, that range you're talking about, we did get some really thoughtful comments too, and constructive ones that we helped us make, a number of changes. And so I think it's kind of looking at, what's realistic we can do and we can't do. But I think it's important for everyone for their voice to get heard, even if we may agree or disagree with them. But yeah, I think that's just kind of part of it. But I did, we did get a lot of comments, and a lot of other states don't do a public comment process. So Minnesota is different than that. And so where we have done it. So this may not the best answer to your question, but oh, okay. Other states, I think, Minnesota itself, our contribution for nitrogen and phosphorus to Gulf is like 4 or 5%. And so other states, kind of like Iowa and Illinois, have a higher load than we're kind of middle of the pack. And so, we've seen some some progress in some of those states, and Iowa's seen some, in some areas has seen some nitrate reductions, but we've, even in like from the baseline period, our phosphorus has gone down quite a bit, but in Illinois it's gone up quite a bit. So it's kind of over the place. But we do work closely with these other states. And like this week, there's a hypoxia task force, which meets with all the leadership, and they're meeting in DC and Thursday this week to kind of talk about that. So that's something we keep in touch, every couple months we're meeting with these various states and learning from them. Both not just on the agricultural side, but a lot of the big things has been, we've done a lot of work here on the point source side, wastewater, which other states haven't. So we're ahead of the curve and behind the curve, depending on what sector we're talking. So, yeah.
When you're checking numbers on like nitrogen levels and stuff in the water, how can you tell the difference between like a natural breakdown of organic matter? Like, because my organic matter is right around that 5% where I'm at, and for farmers over applying, or just what's naturally breaking down?
That's a good question. I think, well, part of it, we've tried to increase our network, that we're trying to monitor so that we can have a better sense of what those localized impacts are. We try through our, doing through both on the chemistry side, seeing how that chemical breakdown is of the nutrients, and also looking at or the impacts to, aquatic organisms as well. I think one of the things that we're working on is kind of a nitrate network too, to kind of get some more continuous monitoring, because sometimes you kind of miss things when you're not monitoring that as closely. And so that's one of the things that we've got somebody from the legislature to kind of look at. And so, but again, as you can say, there's kind of like the larger scale where we're collecting this data, but then at those smaller scales through our federal, it's called our 319 program, we have small grants to local governments, and we're doing some effectiveness monitoring on practices in different landscapes of the state to kind of get a better sense of that. That can be really expensive to do that type of monitoring, but we're working on down in Martin County on a drainage system and trying to get a better sense of that. So I think some of those efforts we're doing.
We better wrap it up. Let's give Matt a hand. Thank you, Matt.